In this video, we're going to work through the control flow demo problems. While we will answer the questions as written, I am also going to go through a couple different approaches and different ways that we could get the same results, but maybe using control flow a little bit differently so that we have a little bit more experience working with the different types of control flow methods. So let's start with the first question. And it's to create a void method named isPositive, one int parameter named number. When called, it should use if-else statements to determine if the number is a positive, negative, or zero number and print the information to the console. Call this method enough times and start to test all cases. I do want to mention that I do already have this set up in a Unity scene. I have my script in here on an object, so when I hit play, we'll be able to see the results. So if you haven't done that already, make sure you pause the video and get that taken care of. If you need to review that, we did cover that in the first demo project. So I'm going to actually approach this a little bit simpler first. I'm going to just use plain old if statements with this, and then we're going to turn them into if-else statements. So an if statement, we're going to start down here, and we're going to create our first method for this one. I think they all use different methods, so we can get some practice with that. A void method named isPositive, one int parameter named number. So we're going to make this a private void, since we're not returning anything, called isPositive. And it has an int parameter called number. We're then going to create our curly braces for that. And just double check. Yes, we did name everything as asked. And then we can start our coding in here. So let's just use some if statements first, since those are the most basic. And if you wanted to do it, do just if statements, then comment them out, and then proceed on and do if else ones after this. This would be a really good example and a template to use so that if you need to set up if statements, like a bunch of if statements or if else statements, you can use this and just change out the information as you need. So int number is what we're going to be checking. So we want to see if it's greater than 0 for a positive, if it's less than 0 for negative, or if it's equal to 0 to indicate that it is a 0. So we'll just say if number is greater than 0, and then the if statement gets its own set of curly braces. So that inside of here, we'll then write code that if this is true, if the number is greater than 0, it will fire off this code. If the number is not greater than 0, this code won't run. All we need to do is we need to print to the console that the number is a positive number. So we'll do a debug.log, and we'll be a little fancy with this, and we'll make sure that we print the number so that it'll be a little bit easier to check that our code is working correctly. So we'll say the number in our double quotes. I'll make a little space. Then we'll concatenate this number in here onto it. So we'll write number plus, then our double quotes again, is positive. And we'll put our semicolon on the end, and we'll be good to go. So if we send it a number like 3, number will be equal to 3. We'll come down into here. We'll say if 3 is larger than 0, which it is, it's true. We'll then print the number 3 is positive. What if we sent it a negative 3? We'd then hit here and say if negative 3 is greater than 0, which it isn't, so we don't care what's in there. We'll just skip it, and we don't have anything left down here. Why don't we take the opportunity to test our code? We always should be kind of testing as we're coding just to make sure we don't make any mistakes. So, we do need to call this in start so that it will run when we hit start back in Unity. So to call this function, we just write its name, isPositive, and we need to send it inside the parentheses our number, since we said we're going to be sending a number with it. And here, we'll just send it that 3. And let's go ahead also and send it a negative number. So we'll do isPositive again, and we'll send it let's just do like a -5. And we should not see this printed since it's a negative number. And we might as well go ahead and do our last one too. Is positive, and we'll send it a 0 because we shouldn't see this printed either. But eventually we should be able to, when we finish coding this out, we should see that printed out. So I'm going to save. I'm going to go to Unity. And I'm going to play this and see what happens. So we get the number 3 is positive, and we don't see the -5 and we don't see the 0. So we know that our if statement is working correctly. We should not have seen those printed out because we haven't coded them yet. Because when the 5 comes in here, -5 is not bigger than 0. When the 0 comes down here, 0 is not bigger than 0. So this never runs. So like I said at the start, let's just work with if statements, and then we're going to change them to if-else statements to see like the differences in there and how they work. Because, you know, if statements are the most simple. And there are times that you would want if statements rather than if-else statements. So let's just do the next if statement. We'll do if number is less than 0. We'll print out debug.log the number plus number plus is positive. All right. So now we got greater than 0. We got less than 0. The last thing we need to do is that one where it's equal to 0. So we'll just do another if statement real quick. If, let's see, number is equal to, and that's the double equal to signs. Remember, if we're trying to compare two things together, it's not the single, it's the double. The single one means that you're setting something equal to, where the double is actually trying to compare them to see if it's equal to that. And if the number is equal to 0, we'll say debug.log the number plus number plus is a 0. All right, so let's run this, double check that this is working. So I'm going to save, head back over to Unity, and hit run. So the number 3 is positive. The number -5 is, oops, I have a mistake there. I think I typed in the wrong thing, is not positive. Good thing we checked before, we bug tested before we sent this off to production. Let's try again. The number 3 is positive. The number -5 is not positive. The number 0 is 0. So now we are getting the results that we did expect to get. So this was answering the question using if statements, but we are supposed to be using if-else statements to answer this question. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between if and if-else statements. So if we have a bunch of if statements like this, what happens when we throw our number in here? So it'll hit here, number, and it'll run this, it'll print this out, and then next it's going to hit this next if statement and check it again to see if this is true, and if it is, it's going to run this, and then it's going to check this one to see if it's true, and if that is true, it's going to run this. So you might want this kind of behavior. You might want to run that number through all 3 if statements. Like there might be reasons why you would possibly need, you know, this scenario obviously doesn't work this way because, you know, it is what it is. But there might be times when you're trying to check something and you do want to possibly print out different information about it. You know, multiple print statements that check for different things regarding that number. That's not always going to be the case. You might hit things where you only want it to check one, and then if it's true, skip the rest. And that's where the if if statements come in. Because if one isn't true, it slides down to the next one, but if the first one is true, it skips the rest of the checks. So it will absolutely never fire those if it is an if-else statement. So let's turn this now into an if-else statement. And the easiest way to kind of think about this is to kind of just talk about it in plain English. And that can kind of help you figure out, how things are supposed to flow. So if the number is greater than 0, tell it that it's positive. Otherwise, if the number is less than 0, tell that it's not positive. And if it's not that or that, it has to be equal to 0. So we'll just print out that it's 0. So the changes we need, we're just going to add an else in front of here. So if it's this, do this. Otherwise, if it's this, do this. And then if it's neither of those things, we're just going to automatically assume it has to be 0. So we can just have a final else down here. So the final else is we don't need to check. This is kind of like the default. If it's not this, it's not this, it's not this, do this. If it's none of those things before that. So this one, so you're going to get something no matter what from this statement. So if you do choose to use if-else, if-else statements, you get something. It's either this or it's that. Where with the if statements, you might get multiple things or you might not get anything. So we're checking this one, we're checking this one, and then if it's not that, do this. And we can add as many else ifs as we'd want. Don't think that you're limited to just one. You could have a giant stack of like 10 else ifs. It's always if first, then you could have like 10 else ifs, and then finally one else. There's only always one if at the top and one else at the bottom if you're using this method. So again, to reiterate, if you have a stack of if statements, multiple can fire or none can fire. If you use if-else statements, only one is going to fire. And it might end up being this last one if none of them are true. This one will always fire as the default if the things above it don't show as true. Okay, so I think we satisfied this. So we determine if it's positive, negative, or 0, and print the information to the console. Call this method enough times and start to test all cases. So that's why we did the positive, the negative, and the 0, so that we can test all 3 levels. All right, so that should be good for that one. Let's go on to the next one. Create a void method named day or night, one int parameter named hour, and one bool parameter named am. When called, it should use if statements and logical operators to determine if the time given is daytime or nighttime. Use the hours of 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. as daytime. Print the information to the console. Call this method enough times and start to test all cases. So the first one, the first question, we just used one statement to see if it was true. And this one, we're going to just make it a little bit more complex and use the logical operators. And so we can have multiple statements in one if statement to test to see if it's daytime, nighttime, AM or PM, since 3 AM is nighttime, 3 PM is going to be daytime. So let's come down here and I'm going to declare it right here. It's just a private void day or night, and we're sending it an int named hour and a bool named am. So the way that this is going to work, if you do want to make notes to yourself, is if it's true, if this bool is sent true, that means it's an am, and if it's false, that means it's PM. That's the way that this is supposed to work. So maybe you make a note of that. So let's start thinking about all the possible combinations, and we can write that in a comment up here so that we don't forget anything. Like what combo of these is supposed to give what results. So if let's see. So if the hour is greater than or equal to 6 and it's AM, it's daytime. If the hour is less than 6 and it's AM, it's nighttime. So what other combinations could we possibly have? We can have if the hour is greater than or equal to 6 and it's PM, it's nighttime. And the last one would be if the hour is less than, actually, I'm sorry, since it should be greater than 6 up here, I misread the question. Since the daylight is between, we're using hours of 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., we're going to say that if it has to be greater than 6. We'll say 6 p.m. is still daytime, but anything greater than that is nighttime. So I'm sorry about that. If the hour is greater than 6 and it's p.m., it's nighttime. I should probably fix my English in here real quick. So if the hour is less than or equal to 6 and it's PM, it's daytime. So it looks like we're going to be dealing with 4 statements. And let's see. We could approach this either way of, we could use if statements, we could use if else. I know it says if statements, so why don't we practice both where we're going to take a couple different approaches to this so we can get a lot of practice. So we'll do if statements first, and then we'll change it to if else. And then I'm going to show you how to do this with nested loops just so that you get a lot of experience with the different types of ways that we can approach this. So we'll just do it with the if statements first. We'll say if, and we're just going to go down through our list of possibles. If hour is greater than or equal to 6, and AM is equal to true. If that's true, we're going to print that it's daytime. Let's make sure. Okay, we're going to print it nicely too. We're going to say I'm trying to decide if I want to. We'll just do it. We'll just do it real simple for now. Then maybe we'll go back and make it a little bit more elegant later. So we'll say it's daytime. We'll do the next one. If hour is less than 6 and AM is equal to true. And I do want to show you one thing real quick with this one. Since this is a bool, we don't actually have to do this. Since AM itself is true or false, we can just do this too. And this indicates that if this is true, if AM is it true, then it fires. So either way works. AM is equal to true or AM, which means that we are expecting this to be true. We'll print out that it's nighttime. We'll do the next one. If hour is greater than 6 and we want it to be PM, so AM is false. So we could do AM is equal to false. And I'll leave this one this way, and I'll show you how to do it this simplified in the next time. We'll say debug.log it's nighttime. And then the last one, if hour is less than or equal to 6 and rather than AM equals false, we can do not AM. And that indicates that we are looking for not true. So not true is false. So either way, this or this. So if the hour is less than or equal to 6 and it's not AM, which means it's PM, we know that it is daytime. So we'll print that to the console. Debug.log. It's daytime. All right, so we did it with the if statements. Let's call all of our test cases up here so that we can test them all. Because remember, we need to call it, we need to give it an hour, and we need to give it a true or false for if it's AM or not. So we'll do day or night. We'll send it, let's see, so we'll kind of just go through this. If it's greater than or equal to 6, why don't we give it a 7 and true. We'll then do a day or night. We'll do 3 and true. Let's do the other ones. We'll do day or night. Let's see, what was it? Greater than 6. We'll just do that 7 again with false. And day or night, we'll do 3 with false. So we should get daytime, nighttime, nighttime, daytime. I'm going to save it and run it. Oops, I accidentally left it running. Let's try that again. So daytime, nighttime, nighttime, daytime. Okay. So this is it with if statements. Let's turn it to if else, because, you know, we could possibly, and it really shouldn't based on the logic, we could accidentally fire off multiples of these. And it's possible that we could also not get any of them if we, you know, we shouldn't based because we did our logic correctly, but, you know, with that's just the nature of if else. I'm sorry, if statements is you can get one, more than one, or none. So this is really easy to switch to if else. So if you wanted to like make a copy and duplicate it and keep it as like an example, feel free. I'm just going to alter my code here. So we're going to say else if. So if this isn't true, check for this. If this isn't true, check for this. If none of those are true, it has to be this. So we're going to change this to an else. We don't need anything else after that. And we got all of that. All right, let's run it. Make sure we're still getting the results that we expect. So daytime, nighttime, nighttime, daytime, we are. So we did it with just if statements. We did it with else if statements. I do want to kind of take another approach to this and kind of show an example of using nested if statements. So that we're going to just check for one, and if that's true, we're going to check for something else on the inside. So any of these approaches, if you were coding this out, unless specified in the instructions, like any of these would be correct. So it's just like we're hitting the point with programming that there's multiple ways that we can accomplish things. So probably, if you're doing this at home, definitely comment this out. I'm going to just delete it for the sake of space. I don't want to take up a whole bunch of room on the screen. But don't delete yours. Maybe comment it or push it down somewhere. But I'm going to just start over again with this. So there are two things that we're checking. We're checking to see if we are what hour and AM or PM. So we could approach this two different ways. We can check to see, we can first check to see is it AM or PM, or we can check to see what the hour is. And I'm going to kind of flip it, and I think I'm going to check to see if it's AM or PM first, so that I can have my first if statement just say if it's AM. If it's not AM, it's going to be PM. So I'm going to just assume down here that it's PM. And maybe I'll make a little note to myself about this. So I don't forget that if you're getting into here, that means that we are on the PMs. So if it's AM, we have two possible things that we need to check for. Is the hour greater than or equal to 6? Or is the hour less than 6? To kind of determine, our output. So if it's AM, so is it AM? Yes. Is the hour greater than or equal to 6? And we can do that with a nested. So I'm going to write if. And notice it is indented, so it's a lot easier to read. Don't put it out here, because things are going to get really confusing. If you're doing nested, it's going to be really hard to parse what's going on. So always make sure if you are doing nested that the next if statement inside of here is pushed in as well. So we'll say if hour is greater than or equal to 6. And then we'll have another else down here. I'm sorry. There we go. And I'm going to give a little note that means that the hour has to be less than 6. Okay, so let's kind of work through this logically. So if it's AM and the hour is greater than or equal to 6, that means it's this time, it's daytime. So we'll say debug.log, it's daytime. So if it's AM and it's less than 6, so it's AM and it's less than 6, we know it's nighttime. So we'll print out debug.log, it's nighttime. So if it's AM, we're getting both results because it's either this or this. So we got these two satisfied. And this works the same way as our previous example where we did the and. So we kind of changed it. Rather than having two if statements, we have a nested if statement to satisfy that. So let's work on the PMs. So if it's PM and the number is greater than 6, we know it's nighttime. So let's do this. Let's do if hour is greater than 6, debug.log, it's nighttime. If it's not greater than 6, we know it has to be equal to 6 or less than 6, which means that it's satisfying this one. So we'll do an else, because it's either one or the other. It's not, can't be anything else. Else, we'll make a little note to ourselves. Hour has to be less than or equal to 6. Debug.log. It's daytime. So one benefit that we can do with this method is we can make it a little bit fancier. It's very easy with this nested one to determine if it's AM, if it's PM. You know, we can make a much better printed out version of this, of like our thing, rather than daytime, nighttime. Let's kind of go in and actually print out the hour and if it's AM. So we're going to come into here and we're going to add on the front of this, the time is space plus, let me fix that. There we go. It's being finicky. Let's see. There we go. The time is, we're going to add the hour. And one thing that, so we got the time is, it's going to print out the hours. So something like an 8. And we want to add the AM to it too. If we're in here, we know that we do have an AM. There's no question about that. So we can just hard code in here, AM, and it'll print out correctly. So same thing down here. If it's in here, we know that it has to be an AM hour. So we can hard code into here. The time is plus the hour plus, oops, let's go here. Oh, it's being weird. Hold on. AM, period, and we'll do a space and say it's nighttime. Down here, we also know that it has to be PM, so we can hard code PM into here. So I'm going to do that first, just PM, period, and a space. PM, period, and space. And before this, we will add the hour, and then add the time is. I'm just going to copy and paste this onto the other one since it's the same. There are ways that you could even make this more efficient with concatenation, with like having a previous string that has this information in it already, and then you just concatenate this on here before you print it. That would be a good challenge if you want to try that out on your own. Like, how can you make this even more efficient? But I think this video is going to be long enough anyway, so I don't want to burden down the video with that. So let's save this and see what we get. We should get a much better looking printout than previous times. So let's try it. So we get the time is 7 a.m. It's daytime. The time is 3 a.m. It's nighttime. The time is 7 p.m. It's nighttime. And the time is 3 p.m. It's daytime. So we're getting the results we want. And not only that, it's better this way because we can, obviously double check that we are getting the results that we need, because we are printing out the results of the hour and the bool. But it's also giving the user more information, because the user, if it just said daytime, like, I guess that's good, but maybe they do want to know that information of what's triggering that. So this is much better than what we had previously. All right, I think we answered that question. So let me shrink that up. I'm going to shrink this one up too. And let's move on to the last one, which is going to be working with switches. So let's read through it first. I'm going to talk a little bit about switch statements. So we are going to create a void method named gradeRange, one char parameter named grade. Use a switch to determine the numerical range of a grade. So an A is 90 to 100. a B is 80 to 89, C is 70 to 79, a D is 60 to 69, and an F is 0 to 59. Print the information to the console. Call the method enough times and start to test all cases. All right, so we're going to do that down here. I'm going to move this out. We're going to first define our method, and then I'm going to talk about switch statements. So it's just another private void that we're going to call grade range. We're sending it a char named grade. And we'll do our parentheses. So switch statements are really great for if you need to check a single variable for a very specific condition. So this kind of takes the place of having a big long bunch of if statements to see if something is equal to something. So we could code this out to say, if grade is equal to A, this, if grade is equal to B, this, if grade C, this, if D, this, if F, this. It can get very, very large when you do it that way. And the case statements tend to be a little bit more simpler. And you can use it for a lot of things, not just chars. You can use ints, you can use strings. But the big thing is you can only test one variable. You can't test multiple variables. So I'm going to do it a little bit fancier just to kind of practice a little bit of concatenation, a little bit like a different approach to how to do this, so that we're not going to print out the information to the console until after our switch statement. So I'm going to make a string variable I'm going to call range. I'm going to just set that equal to nothing. And as we go through our switch, the thing that we're going to change is we're going to set this range equal to like a string of the range, so that we can use that later on to print out like a nice information to it, not just the range. Kind of like what we did with the last one, where we printed out the actual hour and if it's AM or PM and then the information. This will make it a lot easier to understand in the console. So the way a switch works is you write the word switch, you have parentheses, and then you put inside the parentheses what variable you are trying to test. What variable are you testing? We're testing grade. So we're going to do grade inside of here. And then kind of like if statements, there's no semicolon on the end, because it's not a line of code. We're just basically, I kind of mentioned it before. Think of it almost like a folder. Like there's going to be stuff inside the switch statement. The switch statement itself is not considered necessarily like a code statement like here. We're going to contain things inside the switch. So we're going to hit enter and do our curly braces. So no semicolon on the end. It's kind of like an if statement. If statements don't have semicolons either, it just has the curly braces which contain the code associated with that. So we have switch, what we're testing in the parentheses, and then our curly braces. And inside of here is going to contain all of our different cases. So the way that this works is for each thing you want to check to see if it's equal to, we write case, and then what we're checking to see if it's equal to. So we want to see if it is an A. Then we do a colon, not a semicolon, a colon. Then afterwards, we write as many lines of code that we need associated with if grade is equal to A. So if grade is equal to A, we're going to set that range string equal to 90 to 100, because if we have an A, our range is 90 to 100. The last thing we do after, and we can have multiple lines of code, like we could do other things in here if we needed to, but the most important thing is if we're done writing out all the code for A, for case A, we need to write break with a semicolon afterwards. Because what happens is if we get A, said, okay, cool, we'll do this code, it hits break, it stops the switch statement. So it breaks out of the switch statement and then it keeps going on. Because if we hit A, there's no reason to check any other case. We can just kind of keep on going after it because we got what we needed out of it. We're going to keep on. So we did case A, we got to do B, C, D, and F and the default. So I'll do case B. And notice that it does kind of auto fix your formatting as you type it, so don't worry too much about that. Like, don't stop to move it over. It'll fix itself once you finish typing out the full case. We'll set the range equal to 80 to 89. Then we'll break. Case C. We'll set the range equal to 70 to 79. Then we'll break. If we get to case D, the range is equal to 60 to 69. We break. Case F, we'll set the range equal to 0 to 59. Then we'll break. So the last thing we can put down here, and I always recommend using it, is our default. And the default case means what if none of these are true? So it's kind of like our else statement. We could have had it be, we could have put it here. We could have just done A, B, C, D, or, default otherwise. But I usually, in my case statements, like to use this sort of as an error check. So since, these are very specific things, we should never get to the default case. Most likely, if we did get to a default case, that means that somebody entered something that's not A, B, C, D, or F. So we shouldn't see this. So if we do see it, we're going to tell the user that there's something going on wrong. We're going to say error in grade range switch statement. And you don't always have to do this. There are instances where you might want to actually have the default do something very specific. Like there might be like, hey, if it isn't these things, set it equal to this. Kind of like, again, like a default case, like if it's not this, this, or this, always do this instead. And that's perfectly fine too. So let's finish up this problem and let's print out the information to the console based on what we set range to inside of our case. So we need to make sure we're doing this outside the switch. So we have our default, we have our break, so we need to go below this one, but before the end. We don't want to accidentally go outside of our method. We need to be up here. So we're going to do a debug.log, and we're going to print out, and we're going to make a nice concatenated string for this so that we're printing out the information that we sent to it as well as the information that we got. So we're going to say the grade of plus, let's print out that grade that we sent, plus has a range of space, plus let's add on whatever we put inside of range. There we have it. So now we should be able to call this, and we need to call all of our cases just to check that they work, including we want to check our error, because we shouldn't ever get it, but we should make sure that it does actually work if we do put the wrong information in there. So back up into void start. I'm going to start calling grade range. So grade range, we'll send it an A. And remember, since we're using chars, it's the single quote, not the double quote. And you're going to run into problems if you do the double quote. Grade range, B, grade range C, grade range D, grade range F, and let's throw at one that shouldn't give us an actual range but an error. So we'll do grade range throw it a G, might as well. I'm going to save and run this. So let's check them. There it is. The grade of A has a range of 90 to 100. The grade of B has a range of 80 to 89. The grade of C has a range of 70 to 79. The grade range of D is 60 to 69. The grade of F has a range of 0 to 59. Then remember we send the G, so we get error in grade range switch statement. And then we see the grade of G has a range of, and then nothing. Because even though we did do that default, print out that error, once it's done, it's going to keep continuing on and it's going to print this out, which can be helpful because we do see then what the grade, what grade got sent to it. And it'll be a little bit easier to tell that we did send it something wrong. And our range doesn't have anything in it because we set it to blank and we never set it to anything else. All right, I think we answered all the questions. I did go into much more detail than needed, but hopefully this was a lot of extra practice to kind of show different approaches to how you could get the same result, but maybe a slightly different way, and then ultimately turning it into the way that we are asked to in the question. It's very important for these things to make sure that if you're asked to do it a certain way, that you do it the way that you're asked for. So I would recommend, if you're still struggling a little bit with this, maybe make an appointment with the tutoring center. I know the ILC on South Campus does have drop-in tutoring for SGD, specifically like this stuff, like the Unity stuff. You can go anytime it's open and get tutoring. They do have online tutoring, but that is by appointment only, so you do have to go to the website. And always reach out to your instructor and set up an appointment for office hours to go over this one-on-one. The best approach would be to come with the demo completed so that you can discuss areas that you are a little bit confused about. So I will see you in the next lesson.